Hi, Redemption Church. Pastor Daniel Davis here with Sean Nelson. We are recording our question and answers for a sermon we actually did a couple of weeks ago on wisdom for sex, or wisdom in bed, I think we called it, as a sermon, as part of the sermon series. But we got a lot of questions about this topic, actually, as probably not a surprise for you, but some of them kind of pertain to wisdom for sex in the context of marriage. And then some of it had questions that were more related to sexuality, kind of how our culture is navigating these things. So we're tackling this topic in two parts. And so the first one will just really be asking and answering questions about sex in the context of marriage and how to navigate some difficulties or ambiguity in all that. So Sean, thanks for joining us. Why don't you give us our first question? We'll get started.
Well, so our first question is very broad, and it kind of deals with how much we can trust the wisdom of Proverbs when it comes to sexuality. And the question is, given that many of the Proverbs are attributed to Solomon, how do you reconcile the wisdom he gives with sex with the fact that he himself, with all of his wives and concubines and things like that, didn't live it out? Right. So what do you do with the kind of inconsistency? Is this a do as I say, not as I do sort of thing? Or is there something about his life that makes it okay? What is it?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's not a little bit true what you're saying.
Yeah.
He had 700 wives, 300 concubines. Who has time for that?
Yeah.
Anyway, right? So it's a wild departure from what we would say is a wise way to live. And God actually, this is something he is under judgment for. God punishes him for this massive act of foolishness and disobedience against the Lord, and so it is a little sobering, right? So here we're reading the wisdom of Solomon, and then we are in Kings we're reading the foolishness of Solomon, right? How he did such a foolish thing. And I think one of the main takeaways for me in this is clearly God gifted Solomon with wisdom. So the wisdom that's preserved for us from Solomon, I think we can trust that, right? So God gifted him that. Now, Solomon wasted that wisdom, and he chose foolishness anyway, right? So the fact that he turned from wisdom himself should sober us, right? So I think a lot of times, if we've been Christians for a long time, if we've been in the church for a long time, sometimes we can think, well, I've got this part figured out. And here we have Solomon, the king, gifted supernaturally by God with wisdom, and even he fell into foolishness in that way. And so I just want to take from that reality, be aware that you have that we all have weaknesses, and we all can be very weak in this area in particular. And so far from making it less trustworthy, I think it should make it just sobering for us to really be careful in examining our own lives and posture towards our propensity to be fools in our sexuality.
Yeah, humility. If the wisest of us can fall, then any of us can fall.
Right.
All right. Our next question deals more with the role of sex in our lives. So it asks, what is sex's role in marriage well after kids? So I'm guessing here, you're picturing a certain situation. Maybe the kids are grown. There's not really a possibility of having more kids. Does sex have a role beyond just procreation?
Yeah, that's a great question, because obviously procreation is a major part of having sex. It's a goal. It's one of the reasons God gave us sex is to have kids.
Be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, be fruitful and multiply, and there's a way that happens, right? So the question of does it have any usefulness beyond procreation? And I think the Bible says yes, kind of emphatically says yes. When you're reading in Proverbs, the warnings against sexual foolishness, the warnings against adultery and lust, it gives the other side of that with a positive pushing towards sexual delight. It doesn't say stay away from adultery and make babies. Mm-hmm. It says stay away from adultery and enjoy your wife, right? Enjoy, be intoxicated by her love always, right? There's this call to to really embrace the gift of sex from its good designer as a beautiful thing, and as a pleasurable thing, and as an intimacy building thing. So there's never going to be a point in your marriage where you don't where it's not good to be intimate, right? But to pursue relational closeness. God made marriage to be a picture of Christ and the church, and then he gave sex as sort of a physical representation. This is like this level of closeness, right? This level of joy.
The two becoming one.
Yeah, two becoming one, and that's a beautiful picture. And I think a lot of times as Christians we can get a little prudish about this and think, oh, it's just like get utilitarian and really legalistic. And the Bible just celebrates sex. And the Song of Solomon is a celebration in a lot of ways of sex and sexual pleasure between a husband and a wife. And so we should be willing to, eager to, like even disciplined toward enjoying that gift that God's given, even after we have kids.
Yeah, you mentioned something when we were talking about this question earlier on, which was there's even verses in Proverbs that tell us to delight ourselves.
Yeah, and I paraphrase it a little bit, but when in Proverbs 5, when he's warning against adultery, he turns in verse 15 in Proverbs 5 and he says, "Drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well." He's like, don't try to be satisfied out there. Be satisfied at your own home, Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets? Instead, let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. This is kind of saying like, you've grown up with this wife, like you've grown old with this wife, and she's a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all time with delight, and be intoxicated always in her love. And I love that like it's just really frank that this is a good thing to enjoy. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I could read other passages in Song of Solomon that might make you blush as well, but the Bible talks really, really openly about these things.
So our next question kind of deals with a complication that can come up in the marriage sex life, which is what do you do when sex can't happen during or because of medical issues? What does the life look like there?
Yeah, that's a good question because it happens in various ways for various reasons. So I'll imagine a few of those, because I don't the question doesn't give any specifics, and that's fine. But there might be different counsel for different situations. So I'm going to kind of give a few examples. And so one example that actually is pretty common is anytime somebody's on like anti-anxiety, antidepressant medication, libido goes way down. And it is it's a medical thing, right? Mm-hmm. It is and so if that's the case, sexual arousal becomes a lot more difficult, and there's just not as much interest. Sometimes it feels impossible. But even there, I would just say, one, talk to your doctor about things you can do to work through that. Because it's not necessarily
ironclad.
Yeah, ironclad that nothing can happen.
Yeah.
Sexually, and secondly, pursue physical intimacy in whatever way you can. It was one thing to remember all the time when we're talking about sex is sex isn't just for me, it's for my spouse, mm-hmm. right? And so thinking about the good of the other and how do I give myself to my spouse in whatever way I can, and sometimes we rely too heavily on feelings and on libido, and sometimes it's just like, how do I love and serve my spouse in those ways? And so talk to your doctor, and then just pursue intimacy in whatever way you can. And as you do that patiently and lovingly, you might find that you can overcome some of those hurdles. Another thing that can happen is there just might be a period of time where it's just really not. I think about like postpartum. Mm-hmm. Like after having a baby.
Yep.
It's like
medically recommended not to happen.
It's just like don't do that, and that's like a time to set aside that time. Just, hey, we're gonna just pray, and we're gonna give time to heal. And the Bible even gives a category for that, right? So like to set aside sexual intimacy for the sake of our prayers or whatever. Now there's a way to do that intentionally and just rely on the Lord through that season. But then, again, pursue healing and pursue like reconnecting as soon as possible if that's the case. But then there's other times where the door really does close, where if there are really significant medical issues, like, imagine like paralysis or something like that, where
a heart condition.
Yeah, or a heart condition where the doctor's like, hey, this really is not, it's dangerous for you. And then you have to just remember, like, sex was only ever a window into like our relationship with the Lord, and you kind of have to press into that and just trust the Lord and pursue relational intimacy no matter what. I want to pursue closeness and romance and taking joy in my spouse in whatever ways that I can for as long as I can till death do we part, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I'd say kind of working through some of those issues.
Yeah, I think the last thing you were saying, the fact that marital intimacy and sexual intimacy are not one and the same, identical with each other, but one is a part of the other, is very helpful to remember, because people may feel guilty. They may feel like they're not fulfilling their role as a wife or a husband in this way, but you still have so many other ways to be intimate and connected to your spouse. So that's good advice there. The last question we have is kind of just a very broad question, is how do we help those who are struggling in this arena, in the arena of sexuality?
Yeah. And again, this is another one that feels really broad.
Could be any number of things.
And so I think the best way to answer it is to do what I just did and kind of take some examples of what this could mean. And there's a similar, I think, I'm going to give a similar call to each of them. But there are different reasons people could be struggling in this area. And one of them is they could be struggling just physically, like connecting. Or maybe there's pain, or there's just mismatched expectations, and they're just really having a hard time, a husband and wife, figuring things out, and that could be a struggle. And for those people, I just say, hey, talk to some people who've been married for a while, husband to husband, wife to wife, and just really ask, hey, these are some things we're going through. Do you know of anything that's helpful? Talk to your doctor, if there's something physical pain going on or anything like that. But one of the things you shouldn't do is just sort of suffer in silence and keep that off by yourself. Another thing that people commonly mean when they say they're struggling sexually is that there was some sort of infidelity, whether it's pornography or an emotional affair or a physical affair, where there's been damage done to that area of their marriage, and there's just a lot of struggle in trust and connection, closeness, and again, to you, I would say, like, reach out for help. That whoever was struggling in those areas in a sinful way, that there's accountability and that there's a real resolve to rebuild that trust. And then for the spouse who was sinned against, that there's just good support and encouragement, because that's going to take time to heal, and it's going to take intentionality, and you're going to need other people around you to support you through that trial.
Yeah, and if your trust relationship with your spouse is broken at that point and needs repair, you need trust relationships with somebody else. You can't just be an island unto yourself at this point.
I mean, we were literally made for trusting relationships.
Yes.
We were made to trust the Lord in relationship, and we're made to be able to trust one another. And so when those things are broken, it's super painful.
Yeah.
And so don't suffer alone there. And then another area that's just tragically common when we say we're struggling sexually is in areas of abuse. That if there's a marriage where one of the spouses has suffered some sort of sexual abuse in their past, very often that manifests itself in the context of marriage, to where there's just a lot of trauma responses and feeling like you're broken, and there's all this pain that can come from having been harmed sexually. And if that's you, I just want to say, like, there's hope and healing, and you don't have to suffer through these things by yourself. And so I would encourage, again, letting other people into that. And sometimes in this case, I would encourage like a licensed counselor to really just help you walk through the journey of healing. You're not alone. Like, lots of people have been through that in the past, and there's help and healing, especially in the light, as you bring that into the presence of someone who is trustworthy and wise. And so giving that over to someone in a counseling relationship can be very helpful. So all those cases really requires community and trusting other people with that area of your life. We do that with so many different areas, where we welcome people into community and ask people to disciple us in different areas. We've got to let people into our sexuality, that we've got to let people know that part of our lives. And certainly it's not for everybody to know, but that there's somebody that you're willing to talk to about these things openly.
Yeah, and be prudent in what you say to people. Don't get lurid with your details or anything. Open up to it. And I mean, honestly, in most situations, if you're not married yet and you're planning to be married, talk about this during premarital counseling. Because that's the sort of things you're mentioning, abuse and the problems that come into a marriage and things like that. Those should all be kind of front-loaded so that you can deal with those going in a bit more. So.
Yeah, it's a really important part of premarital counseling for sure. Just unearthing whatever's there. Not that you'll work through it perfectly before you get married, but you got to know. You got to know what's there.
Yeah, and it helps build proper expectations.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, guys, that's it for part 1 of our questions about sex and sexuality. Next time, we'll be dealing with more cultural perceptions of sexuality and what's kind of going on in our world in this sphere. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. We'll be back again, and we'll see you then.